I'm Lindsay Harris from the College of Education. I love SciSol and I love this retreat. It's always such a great way to end the year / kick off the new year. And I wanted, I'm standing here because I'm going to be introducing our keynote speaker, but before I do that, I just wanted to say, Britt mentioned at the beginning that we've lasted 10 years, we've out-survived all the founding members, and I wanted to point out that the reason, I know Norm said, it sounds like we're dead. No, but the reason that SciSol is still thriving the way it is because of Britt, because she was determined to see the organization keep going. And has done a great job and kept everybody motivated, so thank you very much, Britt. NIU would not be the home that it is for me without SciSol. Turning to our keynote speaker today is Dr. Lori Elish Piper, who has a very, very long list of achievements and accolades. I'm only going to hit a couple of highlights here. She is currently the Dean of the College of Education at NIU and was the co-director of SciSol between 2008 and 2015. So hopefully she's going to give us a taste of the early years. Other leadership positions, both at NIU and beyond, have included the director of the Jerry L. Johns Literacy Clinic. She was the president of the Association of Literacy Educators and Researchers. She was the director or a member of the boards of directors of the International Literacy Association, Association of Literacy Educators and Researchers, American Reading Foundation, Forum, Illinois Reading Council. And a few of her awards include, she is both a presidential engagement professor and a presidential teaching professor at NIU. She received an award for exceptional contributions for partnership activity from the College of Ed. She received a literacy award from Altrusa International, an Emerald Publishing Literati Award, et cetera, et cetera. Please welcome Dr. Lori Elish Piper.
Thank you, Lindsay. So as a dean, now it suddenly becomes a little nerve-wracking when your faculty are introducing you. They're like, what are they going to say? But it's all good. It's all good. This is the title that was given to me, but it's not really the title that I'm following up on. So I am going to talk a lot about looking back in terms of SciSol, which was ISIL, or ISIL, or CISIL, or CECIL. So giving you a little bit of the history and the development and talking a little bit about why we did what we did, and then also what I see looking forward. So I hope you will humor me in this process. So NIU undertook a strategic planning process called Great Journeys. And this was back in a time long, long ago that many of you cannot imagine, when the university, I think, had money. And so they had a significant amount of money that they wanted to invest in interdisciplinary research clusters and also innovative initiatives across campus. And so they funded lots and lots and lots of different kinds of things. But they had money, they wanted to focus on innovation, and they really wanted to target interdisciplinary research. And so Norm Stahl and I talked when we saw the proposal, and I said, I'm thinking of doing this. And so we sat down and put our heads together and thought about who to invite, and we invited a whole lot of people. We also decided to have food at the meeting. And so I brought in, it was breakfast, and so we had coffee and we had fruit and we had some coffee cake or something. And I could be remembering this incorrectly, but in my recollection, only 4 of us plus Norm showed up, and they were the people that you see on the screen. And so thus was born the initial proposal development team. Actually, there might have been other people in the room, but I don't recall. You may notice something else in the pictures, that obviously 10 years, aging happens. Weight redistribution happens. Other opportunities happen. I'm not saying any of those are directly related to SciSol, but perhaps they are. Actually, I think most of these photos at the time were probably 5, 7, 10 years old, and so some of these photos you're looking at might be 20 years old. It's like, do I know that person? And for those of you that don't know CECIL with the beret, you'll want to make sure that you focus in on that particular photo there. But we had this meeting, and at this meeting we began to conceptualize what we might want to do, what we could do, and we took very seriously the parameters of the proposal process. And they really, really wanted us to focus on interdisciplinary research and they really wanted us to cut across traditional boundaries, not just saying that we're doing interdisciplinary work within a single department, because different people have different lines of research, or not just saying that we're doing interdisciplinary research within or across a couple of departments. They really wanted to push us hard to show that our interdisciplinary research was really leveraging expertise and opportunities across campus. And we took that very, very seriously, both to our advantage and also to our disadvantage. Being interdisciplinary, I think, is the strongest element of SISL, but I think it was also, at least early on, probably the biggest, most frustrating challenge that we faced. And I'll tell you a little bit about that as we move forward. So initially, we thought big. We thought really, really big. We were going to be ISL, the Interdisciplinary Institute for the Study of Language and Literacy. And underneath each, underneath that institute, we were going to have each of what eventually became our strands be a center. Because we thought big. We cast a big net, and we were immediately told, no, you cannot be an institute. And so we struggled for a long time. What do you mean we can't be an institute? Well, you can't be an institute because the Illinois Board of Higher Education has a process whereby to be an institute, you have to meet certain criteria. To be a center, you have to meet certain criteria. So that was, for us, perhaps a rude awakening of the bureaucracy, the red tape, and just a lot of the logistical work that we hadn't really thought of. We really came together as a group of researchers and professors, eventually bringing on board lots of graduate students and other collaborators across campus, and we were really interested in the work, not so much in the structure. But I think looking back, all of the work that we did to build the structure, which I'll highlight pieces of along the way, is part of the reason that 10 years from that time, you're having this retreat. SISL exists. We have so many new faces in the room. The group continues and it grows and it develops, and it's really taken on a life of its own beyond those 4 founding members. And I think that a lot of that is due to the fact that we had that structure, that we had that framework. And so every good center has to have a logo, and so once we realized we were going to be a center, we decided that in-house we were just going to make logos. And so the first one appeared, I believe, at our first retreat. And some of us had not seen it, and we were quite horrified by this evil eye, sort of. Cecil did it, yeah. And we had that for a couple of years, and it was a little creepy. But we completely did not understand issues of branding. And so we decided we needed to do something else, and so then we created the next logo. Perhaps you can say smart art, or like PowerPoint templates. It was the idea of these different pieces, the interdisciplinary pieces coming together and focusing on language and literacy. But as Joe also pointed out for this one, he thought that it looked like some sort of missile. Is that what I thought it was? And so we were a little concerned about the message we were sending, evil eye, or some sort of creepy military missile. But it was lovely, innocent times. There were no people monitoring our branding. There was no one saying, why did you pick blue? Like, blue is not an NIU approved color. And so we were sort of off doing our own thing. But after several years, we decided that we needed to have a more professional looking logo. And so this logo was created. And I say more professional looking. We wanted to capture the idea of strands. We wanted to capture the idea of things sort of coming together. We wanted to capture the idea of kind of innovation and forward movement. And just fortunately enough, Jan Holt, who was one of the founding members of SISL, her daughter is a graphic designer, and she did some graphic designs for us. And so that's where this particular logo came from. Imagine my joy when I walked in the room and I saw that the blue SISL pens are on the table. Those are indeed the best pens on the planet. Do you all love those pens? They write good, and I love the little cushion. They're just the right size. I don't like the skinny little pens. I write very large, and I like the feel of it in my hand. But another sort of ongoing challenge that we had was, how do you pronounce SISL anyway? And so, some of us who are teacher educators, and I'm specifically a reading educator, we had many a conversation about SISL versus SISL. And I think that debate continues. And so while many of us would say that the Great Phonics debate or the Great Phonics War has been resolved, I think this particular acronym might continue to allow it to flare up over time. And so one of the other things that we had to decide early on was who are we and what do we want to do? And so initially when we came together, we talked about wanting to create a big tent. And in creating a big tent, we wanted to include lots of people, anyone who is really interested in language and literacy, and anyone who thought that there might be some benefit for them to participate in SISL. And so in casting that really broad tent, we created some tension. Certain people on campus, for example, people in the Division of Research and Innovation Partnerships is what it's called now. It was called something else then, I don't remember, really wanted us to say, just focus on getting grants. And we kept saying, well, getting grants is part of what we do, but part of what we do, and probably the more important part, is building community. Building opportunities for people to come together, to share, to learn, to create partnerships, to identify opportunities, so that then when grant opportunities come along, people know each other, they've got ideas that they can then quickly enact into developing, viable, fundable grant proposals. But that notion of how big the tent should be. Should there be requirements to be an affiliate? Or can you simply say, hello, I would like to be an affiliate, and voila, you're an affiliate. And we took that second route. We really felt that we needed to create a critical mass, that we really needed to bring people together and find out what the group wanted to do, what the group saw as our opportunities, what the group saw as the value-added benefits that they wanted to receive from partnership, and also what great ideas they had that we hadn't even thought of. And so that notion of how big the tent should be was one that we, not so much internally, but externally, we oftentimes had to justify. We would say things like, we have 76 affiliates, and someone would say, yes, but how many are really involved? And you'd say, well, what does it mean to be involved? And so that tension continued. So in case you're interested, and I probably shouldn't, but in Dropbox, I still have access to all the old SISL files, so if anybody needs any of those archives. And so I actually found the proposal. At that point, it was the Interdisciplinary Institute for the Study of Language and Literacy. Was officially submitted on January 20th, 2009. I actually saw the document, I looked through it, and this was kind of our initial stab at what we were going to do. So if you look at that, you can see again, we were the Interdisciplinary Institute of the Study of Lifespan Language and Literacy. That's a mouthful. You think the Center for the Interdisciplinary Study of Language and Literacy is a mouthful. This was a bigger mouthful. And then if you look below that, we had some arrows pointing to the different groups and kind of the relationship between the groups. But we were going to focus on being a language and literacy research center, a research and statistical methodology and assessment center, and a technical assistance center. Those were going to be kind of our three big buckets. So, mind you, we were literally creating something out of nothing. We were kind of making it up as we go. And so this is where we thought our best work would be. We were really trying to leverage the expertise not only of, we were called champions. I loved that term. So Joe and Jan and Cecil and I, the university called people who were submitting great journeys, proposals, champions, and you had to have a certain number of champions. And so that was like the best title ever. Lindsay, next time you introduce me, you can include that. So we had the 4 champions, and we also had 31 affiliates at that time. And we worked really hard to get affiliates. And sometimes it might have been, did we twist your arm, Britt, for example? Or like say, oh, this is really good. So we got 31 people who said yes, they supported it, they signed on to the proposal. And we felt that was really important because we wanted to show the interdisciplinary commitment. But we also wanted to show that this wasn't just 4 people who had an idea, but this was an idea that included lots of people. And one of the strategies that Joe oftentimes liked to use that I think served us very well was we had to list everything. So like every grant that every single one of the 4 champions and 31 affiliates had, every publication, every presentation, every award, anything that we could have to really just overwhelm or over-impress people that we had the expertise, we had the commitment, we had the productivity for them to invest in us. And while that was oftentimes an incredibly lengthy and challenging task for grad assistants usually to compile all of that information, I think it did serve us well. So this was the initial proposal, and as you can see, even from this proposal to where we were 7 years ago or 5 years ago or even today, things have continued to grow and evolve. And I think that's one of the hallmarks of a really good center, is that you're growing with the expertise of your affiliates, but also with the opportunities and with the developments in our professional fields, with developments in terms of what's being funded in terms of research. And so I think that sort of fluid development is really important. But then we also realized in the process, again, I earlier mentioned a little bit about bureaucracy and red tape. We quickly came to learn that it's not so much just what you know, but it's who you know. And so early on, the leadership team, we really leveraged connections. We really leveraged folks who could help us do things that we needed to do. We had to learn about university bureaucracy. And things like, how could the study of language and literacy be controversial? I will never forget literally a knockdown drag out with someone who was saying that we couldn't do this because their work intersected with this and they didn't want to participate in SISOL. Joe, I don't know if you remember this. I'm not going to say any names or specifics, but multiple face-to-face and phone meetings that were very tense. And, you know, just interesting, just things that sort of blindsided me as an individual faculty member who historically had worked kind of in my own little area by myself or with my very close collaborators. So when you sort of got out into the real world and people started seeing that the university was investing in the center and was providing support, was providing recognition, was providing opportunities, that there became some competition, if you will. Strategic planning, that was probably the most brilliant thing that we did, was we spent money and time on strategic planning. And Chris Parker, I don't know how many people remember Chris Parker, but he was a faculty member in psychology, specifically in IO psychology, who had facilitated strategic planning for lots of groups. And so he was gracious enough to do this for us. And going into that strategic planning, you know, we thought we knew what we might do, but that was, I think, such a pivotal moment, was identifying our mission, identifying our strands, articulating you know, what our priorities were, because that really gave us direction. And I looked back and reread those a few days ago, and I think that for the most part, they're still very relevant and very helpful, and that maybe they do need to be adjusted or revisited from time to time. But that strategic planning process, I think, was enormous. We spent a lot of time, people invested a lot of time, and I think that the outcomes were critical, and I think that that strategic planning was part of that infrastructure or part of that framework that I was talking about before that has really allowed the center to continue on. So knowing who you are and what you do and what you value, it just makes perfect sense that you need to know that, especially when you have competing interests or demands or opportunities or things that are valued in different kinds of ways. Having that strategic plan is really vital to make sure that you're taking the center in the direction that it needs to be going. Another brilliant idea, and this was Joe's idea, I'll give Joe all the credit for this, was we needed to have an advisory panel. Norm also concurred that we needed to have an advisory panel, although they had different reasons for why we needed to have an advisory panel. They were both extremely accurate and helpful. So basically, we sort of inventoried some of the heavy hitters we knew that would actually come to campus. So like people that we had worked with closely or that we had very collaborative relationships with, or people who were nearby. You'll see some people from like University of Illinois Chicago who were willing to come in. But we did different things with these people who were on the advisory panel. So, you know, Art Gracer, we wanted to talk a lot to him about, you know, creating a center, running a center, you know, the operation of a center, like the vital considerations and components that we should address. Others came and gave us maybe more broad advice on developments in what they perceived to be the trends in funding for language and literacy research, changes that they saw in terms of different kinds of research methodologies that were being used that were quite cutting edge or innovative that might be informative to us as we were thinking about kind of what's next. And all of these folks graciously, at one point or another early on, came to campus. We leveraged them to give keynote presentations. We branded them as SISOL events. We invited everyone, and then we got these folks to sit down with the leadership team in a conversation to really just pick their brains, to get their feedback, to get their input. And that was incredibly important because they were all very experienced, not only researchers and grant getters, but also very experienced in working in a variety of different kinds of centers and institutes at really top tier institutions, and so they had so much insight to share. You know, and this is probably also why we created the Certificate of Graduate Studies, because we were told that we needed to have, at that time, to be relevant, we needed to have a foot in academic course delivery and credit hour generation and those sorts of things. And you know, as the university's priorities wax and wane depending on the greater context, not only in the state of Illinois but across higher ed in general, those things happen. And so I think that's essential. Yeah, that relevance is enormous. At that strategic planning, this was our original mission that we had created, and you can see that, you know, engaging in basic and applied research in language and literacy, developing and applying innovative research and assessment methodologies to address complex issues. A lot of that came from Jan Holt initially. Jan was one of our founders and then the Strand Chair specifically in the research and assessment methodologies, and she felt very strongly that we needed to be looking at ways to create new methodologies to address the complex issues that we were trying to, the complex phenomenon that we were trying to study. And one of the things that she really advocated for in her role was that early on, each summer, I don't know how many of you remember this or participated in this, each summer we would have research methodology workshops for faculty and for a small number of graduate students. And it would be a really, really deep dive in a particular methodology. And Jan and other SciSol affiliates who had expertise in those methodologies would present. And so that was one of the things that grew out of that particular aspect of the mission. Identifying and promoting best practices in language and literacy, I'll argue that that's probably, at least during my time actively being involved as a co-director and member of SciSol, that's probably one where we did less work, where we didn't necessarily really get to that sort of level of, that we were promoting particular practices and providing evidence-based outreach that generates results. We tried that quite a bit in different ways. We tried to leverage what was going on in the literacy clinic. We tried to leverage what Emily Prieto, who at the time was the director of the Latino Resource Center, was doing. We tried to leverage the expertise that we had with response to intervention, which is what it was called at the time. We tried to leverage the expertise that we had with the evaluation system for educators, and so looking at that value-added model of calculating whether they actually were showing student growth in terms of student assessments. We tried to provide a lot of that sort of evidence-based outreach, technical assistance, and we had little pockets of that. But that was not necessarily something that during my time that really took off. But I think it was a sort of an ancillary piece. But I think it was a piece that enhanced and also engaged some folks who do a lot of that kind of work and were willing to let us brand it as kind of a SciSol initiative. As we looked at this mission, we wanted, getting back to that big tent, we wanted to be a big tent. We wanted the focus to really be on language and literacy, but we really wanted a big tent because we really felt that that was of value to the center. And so, so I'm glad to hear that the mission has been updated, if you will, because, a mission normally has a lifespan of 5, maybe 7 years maximum, just thinking about how, personnel changes, thinking about just changes in disciplines, changes in the university, changes in funding, changes in, all those different contextual factors that require you to kind of look back and say, like, is this what we're doing? Is this what we should be doing? And so the strands are really the fabric of SciSol. And so in thinking about these strands, we wanted to make sure that the strands allowed everyone to participate in meaningful kinds of ways, but that they gave us some sense of identity. And another thing that we did that I thought was brilliant, and it again was not my idea, was to have strand chairs. And these strand chairs had deep expertise and commitment to the specific strand. And we had leadership meetings, usually in Gable 147G. I don't know where you're having meetings now, but we were in 147G at the time. And folks would come to the table and we would talk about like who were speakers we could bring to campus, what were different initiatives we could do, what were opportunities, some in trying to think of particular grant opportunities, what strands did we need involvement from and who were people we could bring on board, what was already going on that we could get people to co-brand as a SciSol initiative with us. We did a whole lot of that early on. And again, I think that was really smart because it got our name out there. Joe was just reminiscing when we were sitting at the table earlier that someone said early on to him, you guys are all about branding and like getting your name and your brand out there. And I'm not sure if that was a positive or a negative when that individual said that, but I think it is both positive and negative. I think it's positive in the sense that we needed to be real, right? Like we created something, we submitted a proposal, we needed for people to know who we were and what we were doing. We needed for people to know that so they could become involved, be affiliates, be active, engaged members, but we also needed decision makers on campus to support us. We needed people to fund us. We needed people to, provide the support that was necessary along the way. And that branding, I think, was really critical. So a few minutes ago, I mentioned to you, this was the logo. I'm sorry that this logo has been sunsetted. But now, hopefully, you can see the strands, you can see the complexity, you can see the innovation that we tried to put into that particular logo. There were multiple versions of this logo, some of which look like Pac-Man. And so we settled on this one because we could live with it and it looked less Pac-Man-ish, but we selected it because we felt that it showed the strands, it showed the complexity, and it showed the innovation that was the hallmark of the work that we were trying to do early on in the development and implementation of SISOL. And so I talked a little bit before about building a leadership team, because you don't know what you don't know until you know it. And so getting buy-in across colleges, we were always very, very conscious of the fact that from the get-go, we really had two colleges that were deeply involved and a third college that was involved but across a smaller number of people. So basically College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, College of Education, and College of Health and Human Sciences. We consistently were looking for members elsewhere, and occasionally we'd have someone who would come in from somewhere else. But generally speaking, those were our primary three colleges, and we wanted to make sure that that leadership team showed representation, not just and expertise, not just in those strands, but also across colleges, to make sure that we had people, you know, who were coming from different perspectives. But we were also very sort of opportunistic in the sense of thinking, if we have three colleges involved, that's more resources to get to support us. If we have, you know, at various points in time, maybe 14, I'm making that number up, but something like that, different departments that have multiple affiliates, that gives us another place to get support. And what does support mean? It could mean a lot of things. It could just mean helping get the word out about events so more people show up. It could be recruiting more people. It could be co-branding events. It could be looking for financial support. Early on through that leadership team, we did a lot of cost sharing. And so I mentioned, for example, those summer methodology workshops. Where I went to the summer methodology workshop on hierarchical linear modeling and then quickly understood that I needed Jan Holt to tutor me, which she did, and I was able to learn that well enough to do a couple studies using that approach. But for those summer methodology workshops and some other initiatives, we went to colleges. We went to the Division of Research and Innovation Partnerships. We went to the graduate school and asked for co-sharing of costs. People investing because faculty and graduate students in those areas were getting value-added experiences, were involved, and we wanted to make sure that everyone understood what we were doing. And so while it was maybe not as necessary from a financial standpoint to cost share certain things, I think it was important for people to feel that they were part of it, and then we would acknowledge all of them. And SISOL is working with the graduate school, SISOL is working with the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, and so on down the line. And so getting that buy-in across colleges is really important. So in the College of Education, I never really had an issue with that. Norm was a great champion as my department chair, and I don't know how much, if any, he talked to the dean about it, but Norm's support was such that we had whatever support we needed in the College of Education. And so he helped us find an office. A little office that for many years served as the SISOL office where the grad assistant worked. And he let us use his department office manager to help us manage our budget. And so lots of support there. In other colleges, varying degrees of support, and I think a lot of it was awareness. And so it took a number of years for some colleges to really get a sense that there was an ongoing involvement of faculty and graduate students in SISOL. And so that notion of building that buy-in was really vital. And so I mentioned earlier that one of the key requirements was to be interdisciplinary. To get the funding from the Great Journey Strategic Plan, we had to be interdisciplinary. So we were interdisciplinary pioneers. Like, we took this to heart, and everything was interdisciplinary. Like, we didn't want to be in a college. We wanted to make sure that we had leadership that represented multiple colleges. We really bought into that, and we really thought that that was important. But in case you didn't know this or hadn't heard this, our campus is really quite siloed. And so it was very challenging. Just even from an infrastructure standpoint, they're like, well, it has to be in a college. Like, which college is it in? Is it in liberal arts and sciences, or is it in education? And we're like, well, it's not in either. It's its own thing. And you know, we went round and round and round. That had to do with, you know, money, where do indirects for the center flow. It had to do with space. It had to do with support. It had to do with who gets to count it. You know, all sorts of considerations. And it was challenging, and it was frustrating because we were really trying to do interdisciplinary work. And so for those of you who weren't part of that era, you may not realize just how innovative the center was, because prior to the center at NIU, all these other centers were very much based in a specific discipline, in a specific sub-area, which made a lot of sense because there was depth of expertise, but we were trying to do something very different. And it was challenging. One aspect of the challenge was the business plan era, also known as Weekly Torture for Joe and Lori. Several years into Sisal, we were told by the then person who was they had different titles, and he was like the director of the Office of Sponsored Projects. Very well-meaning, but said to us, if you're going to be sustainable, you need to have a business plan. And Joe and I are like, okay. And they're like, and we have taken the liberty of spending a lot of money to hire some consultants to write a business plan with you. We looked at each other and we're like, ruh-roh. And so the idea behind the business plan was really that we could not just rely on the university's seed money and on external grants. And Joe and I were kind of looking at each other going, really, we can't? Like, maybe we could? And so in this business plan, they really wanted us to look at what else we could do to generate revenue. And we worked long and hard. And yes, there's a room in Loudon that when I walk past it, I have flashbacks because it was intense. It was intense. And I think it was well-meaning, but that was, I mentioned early on the idea of we wanted to be a big tent and people wanted us to be a small, very exclusive, membership-only tent. This was another place where we really felt that tension. And so we went through the process. We were good soldiers. We went through the process and we'd bring it back to the leadership team. We'd talk to the strand chairs. We'd give people an opportunity to give us feedback, and then Joe and I would get ready and we'd go back again and we'd get, so anyway. And while it was incredibly frustrating, and I think that this is probably still somewhere in the Sisal office, it's probably in a binder, it was massive. It's like one of those giant 3-ring binder type documents that's so lengthy you can't use it because you can't find anything in it. But a couple of things that came out of that business plan era that I think were good is that we really began to think more strategically about how we did use our funds, and really began to think, because initially the university gave us a lot of money, and so we threw out a lot of different initiatives. We spent money writing Sisal policy briefs. We spent money doing lots of different things because we thought maybe they would work. And so this business plan process caused us to really think about which of those things that we are investing in is giving us a return on investment. Which of those things that we are investing in is making a difference for our affiliates, is strengthening the center, is strengthening the benefits that our affiliates get, and also strengthening the contributions that Sisal is making from the individual work of affiliates as well as collaborative work across groups. And so in this process, they really forced us to identify a couple of areas of expertise. And so this took weeks and weeks and months and what seemed like a lifetime. Because Joe and I kept going, but we have strands. And they're like, the strands are not specific enough. And we'd say, that's by design. And they'd say, so my recollection in the business plan era was that we identified 2 areas that we felt we had rich, deep expertise, but also had good funding opportunities, areas that were being invested in, not only at the federal level, but also by foundations and other funders. And those 2 areas of expertise were this sort of post-secondary literacy, college readiness kind of broad-based area. And then the other one was kind of bilingual ESL education. And we had Sisal affiliates who had been well-funded in those areas, and we had rich expertise and a lot of interest in those areas. And so finally one day Joe and I looked at each other and said, if we tell them those are the 2 areas, maybe we can stop. And so anyway, I share this business plan era with you just to let you know that the university was trying to really help us be more real. I mentioned earlier, pens and mugs sort of humorously as a way to be real, but they were really trying to push us forward to think about being sustainable. They were really pushing us forward to think about using our resources wisely, doing the things that made a difference, and figuring out, again, how to take that branding of ourselves a step further and let people know what the more specific areas of expertise were, the things that we could do, the things that we could contribute. And we hatched a couple of specific initiatives after that maybe worked with differing degrees of success. And so, like, between Joe and me, we brought to the table his grant expertise and a lot of my outreach and in the literacy clinic fee for service and offering professional development and those sorts of things. And so yeah, we did hatch a number of things after that. We did a couple of conferences where we'd make $1,000, $2,000 here or there. We did an initiative where we put together an administrator academy proposal for the Illinois State Board of Ed that didn't get funded, and then we took the initiative and we actually implemented it in DeKalb schools and got a little money. But after doing that, we kind of looked at each other and felt like there's aspects of the business plan that really informed us, but we are not like a for-profit company, and so we kind of stepped away from some of those things and really thought about how do we best leverage what we're good at, what we have the expertise to do. So this next slide is purposefully has an annoying title, Leveraging Collaborative Synergies. So I was thinking back about things that we did and why we did them, and I thought that you might find them interesting. So here we are, 10th retreat. It's very exciting. I didn't even look to see where the retreat was because the retreat is always in the Sky Room. And so I'm glad it was here when I got here. And so the first retreat, one of the original 4 of us said, after the retreat we'll have wine and cheese, because we were trying to lure people to stay and talk. And we felt if we could lure people to stay and talk, we could begin to find out what people were working on and ways that there might be collaborative opportunities. And so back at that corner, we had wine and cheese. And after the retreat, people sort of dwindled during the day. And after the retreat, it was, I believe there were 4 of us. We looked at each other and we said, boy, there's a lot of wine, and boy, there's a lot of cheese. Events. I already mentioned branding Sisal on existing events. That was something we did early on, and that's something that you probably still have lots of opportunities to do that. So if a department is having a graduate colloquium speaker, co-branding that. If a college is having a student research symposium or a student poster, research poster session, co-sponsoring it. It's just another way to get your name out there. It served us well early on, and it may still be a strategy that makes sense at this point. The affiliate poster session. So early on, we decided that we were going to do this poster session as a way for people to see what research others were doing. And it was downstairs somewhere in this building. And so we had like one of those classrooms that holds maybe 30 people. And we figured it would basically just be us kind of walking around, looking at one another's posters. We couldn't believe it. We got there. There were literally like 100 people like crammed into this room. They were coming from everywhere. They all looked so young. There was a general education class for speech that required students to go and have a conversation with someone in an academic setting, and so they all came to the Sisal affiliate poster session. So my colleague Susan Lallier and I were doing a poster presentation for our Alva Knight grant that we'd gotten from the International Literacy Association, and it's this very complicated situation with literacy coaching and the teachers they coach and the outcomes in literacy for the students they coach. And so, we had this we're giving our explanation, and we would explain it to this very young student, and that young student would write a couple things down and then say thank you and then move on to the next poster. And the next student came and asked the same question. So after about 3 students, finally, Susan or I said to the students, are you guys all from a class? And they're like, oh yes, we are. We're from a class. We're taking a speech class. And one of them said, and your speech was really quite good. So I took that as a compliment. But I share that story with you just because the affiliate poster session was something where we just set up, people had posters from conferences, right? So throughout the year, we go away and we present our posters or our presentations at conferences. But we oftentimes don't hear what people across the hall or down the hall or across campus are presenting and sharing. And so the affiliate poster session was one way to try and cross-pollinate work and to just let people know who was doing what and what areas that expertise people had, and maybe additional opportunities for collaboration down the road. But if you are going to have it with a general education speech class, you might want to get a larger room. We did brown bags. We did graduate colloquia that we branded. We did roundtable discussions. We we're always looking for the perfect way to bring people together to have conversations, and I don't know that we ever found it, but I think that what was perfect was that we were committed to finding ways to bring people together to have professional conversations about language and literacy research. And I think that that was probably one of the big ahas for me. One of the other strategies that I implemented that I'm proud to share with you, Lisa Freeman was our new vice president for research. She'd been on campus a day or two, and she and I were at a meeting together, just serendipitously. I knew who she was because I had seen in the NIU Today story, and I saw her picture, and she walked in, and I could recognize her. I strategically sat next to her and monopolized her for probably the next 15 minutes, telling her all about Sisal. Trying to get by and knowing that the vice president of research, who is now our university president, was critical in providing us support and in continuing to invest in the center. And probably one of the proudest moments I had was maybe 30 seconds into my spiel, she said, I've heard about Sisal. I know what you're doing. I think you're doing really great work, and I look forward to working with you. So that was an aha moment. Joe shared a brilliant insight, which I think is true today as it was then. Fund their students and they will come. Finding ways to support graduate students as a way to recruit faculty and vice versa because of the benefits that can be offered, but Sometimes we'd have difficulty recruiting faculty from certain kinds of areas, and then figuring out ways to meaningfully support their graduate students or engage their graduate students was a way that sometimes caused those faculty to become more involved. And then, of course, did I mention the pens, the mugs, and the affiliate door placards? Humorously, but they made us real. How many of you walk around campus and still see those placards on people's doors? How many of you see the old placard, the blue one? They're around, and I think just that presence is important. I mentioned earlier that we continued to struggle, I would say probably during our whole tenure as co-directors, of the tension of the big tent and big outcomes. And we felt that we could do both, and we argued to do both, and I'm so excited to see that SISL is still doing both. Doing great work, but also being very inclusive and being very big tent focused, because you never know where the next great opportunity, where the next fabulous collaboration will come from. So some of the lessons from learning back: sustainability. If this had been a center about Lori, Jo, Jan, and Cecil, you wouldn't be at this retreat today. So I am so thrilled to see so many new faces. I see some familiar faces in the room as well, but that sustainability is vital. That SISL, I think, has gotten to the point where it's real, and it will continue. And while having a great leader or having great contributors is important, that's going to continue to shift and change as people retire, people come, people go, people are at different places, people like myself take on leadership responsibilities elsewhere. There's always been others to step up, and not just to step up to do what was happening before, but to step up and move the center forward, to move it in a different or a better or a new or a more interesting kind of way. And so I think that is probably one of the proudest things. That interdisciplinary work is important, but it's an incredibly challenging goal. Marketing matters, getting the name out there, letting people know, providing value for your affiliates, and what people want to get out of it, because people will participate if it's valuable and meaningful to them. And so continuing to figure out what that is. I was so thrilled to hear about the eye tracking system that's available. We first started out and we thought, we'll get books. We had a lending library and people will come to the office in Graham 119 and check them out. Then we moved on and we had laptops, and we had some software on the laptops. Like, for example, we had a couple with InVivo that people could check out. But it's so exciting to see that you've continued to grow that and thinking of lots of different ways to provide value for affiliates. Community matters, coming together, spending time, getting to know one another is a vital component of this. And outcomes do matter, and being able to document those outcomes. So I was teasing kind of Joe earlier, saying that he made us list everything, but that was probably one of the best things we did, because we could total up in our annual reports how much money came in, how many presentations were given, how many publications came out of it, how many grant proposals were submitted, how many colloquia we had with approximately how many people at them. I think all of those things really helped to build the foundation and the reputation for SISL. And if it isn't working, let it go, or if you don't have funding for it, let it go, and that's okay. Just continuing to grow and evolve, because as membership changes, people get bored too. So what's something new, what's something interesting, what's something different, or what's something that's doable in our current context. And also creating something out of nothing was really a gift for, I think, all of us. And I hope that you will continue to contribute to and help to craft and help to direct SISL as it moves forward, because what it is today is not what it will be 1 year or 10 years or 20 years from now, and I think that's really exciting. So as we think forward, I really think of SISL as an incubator for research teams. That's something that we really wanted to develop, that when I was in my role, never really fully took off. So people coming together committed to being a research team, not just when there's a proposal to submit, but because you're doing preparatory work, you're figuring out what your next project could be, you're laying the groundwork. And so I really see SISL playing a vital role in being a space to put together some of those research teams. Setting the research agenda for funders, collaborating with, talking to different funding agencies about what their priorities and directions are, but having input into that process. Expanding the funding base to look at working with private foundations and other sorts of funders. Some of the work that people are doing can even be funded by business and industry, as we're looking at some of the technology that people are using in their research. Convening conferences or think tanks for cutting edge researchers. Bringing people together really to do a deep dive. Early on, we submitted an AERA proposal to bring together top researchers in language and literacy to really set the agenda for early literacy research, and we were not funded. And we stopped that effort. We didn't reconceptualize and resubmit and get more people on board. And I think that is something that I would hope that because of the construction of the group could be a great opportunity to really put SISL on the map, but really be able to contribute to the direction of research. And then I think also being an innovation center for language and literacy, doing more dissemination of the great cutting edge research that people are engaged in and sharing that not only internally and at professional conferences, but sharing it in other ways to get the word out, not only to researchers, but also to practitioners. And then I think also a piece that we dabbled in that there might be an appetite for is that professional development for educators. So you found some great things about what to do or what not to do or how to do it or what to do with which group of students. Professional development for educators who are in classrooms who can apply the work that you're doing. So trends to consider, that interdisciplinary research, it's truly crossing boundaries. It's difficult, but it's really the only way that we're going to be able to study and get answers to the complex phenomenon that we face as educators. I think we also always need to be mindful of issues of diversity and equity. And as we think about our research, making sure that our populations are representative, making sure that we're looking in contexts that are real, making sure we're looking in settings that will have application to real life use. And thinking about those populations, going beyond just maybe the easiest population to secure, but really thinking about the impact of our work. Getting our innovations into classrooms, I think, is a very important consideration. So we do the research, we get positive results, then how do we figure out how to get that into classrooms so that we can see how that's actually working? Going back to Jan Holt's advice to us, innovative methodologies. What are we doing? What could we do? So even looking at the eye tracking system, talking about the brainwave software, talking about heat mapping. Some of those techniques were not things that we were talking about when SISL was originally created. But figuring out how to leverage those tools in order to engage in meaningful research. And then there's probably lots and lots of other trends that we could consider, but those were a few that came to mind for me. So, really my question for you is, where is SISL going next? I don't know, I can't predict. It's really up to you and to whoever's gonna be in this room next year and the year after that. One of the things that I was proudest of was that while we always had co-directors or director and a leadership team, that SISL really was a group that was a community. And so figure out what are the next great opportunities, what can you do, what do you need, what do you want to do, where do you want SISL to be 1 year or 3 years or 5 years from now. So thank you for humoring me as I sort of reflected on 10 years of SISL and my involvement in most of those years. And hopefully you heard something that either was helpful or something maybe that filled in a gap about why we did or didn't do what we did or didn't do. And thank you, Joe, for your contributions to that. And so now I think Joe might be speaking shortly, in which case he'll correct me for all the things I left out, because I'm sure I left out many, many important ideas. But thank you, and I was so touched when I walked in the room and saw so many of you here. And I was touched that I saw some faces I knew, but I was more touched, I think, that I saw so many new faces I haven't seen before. And so it's exciting to see that not only is SISL in great hands with a number of our committed veteran members, but we also have new folks here to help usher it into the future. So thank you.